Hey everybody, Professor Dust here, and today we have mindful leadership. So this is another contemporary leadership theory. So we've talked about classic approaches, we've talked about contexts of leadership, and we've also talked about contemporary leadership in that it can be based upon a certain style or collection of behaviors. So mindful leadership arguably is a great example of the most contemporary of the contemporary leadership approaches. There's not a ton of research on it yet, but there is certainly a lot of practitioners that are very interested in this concept of mindfulness and this idea of mindful leadership behaviors. And so this will be a fun one to pick apart because it is wildly popular, but there's actually not a lot of evidence quite yet to really clearly define what it is and how it works. So first, let's just talk about mindfulness. What is the definition of mindfulness and where does that come from? And a good way to really conceptualize this idea of mindfulness is to talk about different states of consciousness. So the definition is non-judgmental, present moment attention and awareness. And some people will leave out that non-judgmental component, and others think it is an important part of that definition. But nonetheless, it's about having attention in the present. And one way to think of it is in this 2x2 of present moment attention and attentional breadth. So a scholar by the name of Eric Dane came up with this model, helping outline when certain types of states of consciousness could potentially be productive. And so if you think of it in this 2x2, mindfulness is when present moment attention is high. You're very focused on right now, not what's going on in the future or in the past. And then also your attentional breadth is very wide. So you're paying attention to everything going on in your surroundings, all of the stimuli. You are very present and non-judgmental as information is coming into your purview. That's actually not the only productive state of consciousness. Another important productive state of consciousness is this idea of flow. And flow is also present moment attention. You're paying attention to what's going on right now. But in addition to that, it's very narrow. And so when you're in flow, your skills, knowledge, abilities is directly in alignment with whatever the demands of the situation are, and time just flies by. You know, it's one of those situations where you're working, and all of a sudden you look up and an hour's gone by, and it just feels like it was, 2 minutes. That's this idea of flow. And both of them are very productive, but for different reasons. Flow is ideal when you're doing deep thinking. So if you're writing something or coding something like that. Mindfulness can be ideal during teamwork, interaction, paying attention to different things going on. Ideally right now, I'm being mindful and then I'm paying attention to how I sound and what I'm going to say next. And if I get distracted, all these things help me stay present and be in the now. The other states, the unproductive states, are when present moment attention is low. And the first one we'll talk about is mind wandering. So we're all over the place. And this is actually the mind's natural state of mind wandering. That's just what it's made to do, is to constantly float around thinking about different things and attaching to different things. And it's just the way it's equipped. But it's also wide in that there's really no rhyme or reason to it. It's all over the place about all sorts of different things. One minute you're thinking about your friends. One moment you're thinking about school. One moment you're thinking about what's on your phone or whatever it might be. The fourth is ruminating and fantasizing, and that it's also not focused on what's going on right now. It could be ruminate about something, a very narrow sense in the past. So something bad happened, or you feel like you did something silly and you're ruminating it over it and just wish you had done it differently. Fantasizing is also very narrow, but it's in the future. So you're thinking about a upcoming presentation, or you got a big date with somebody you really like. You're just role playing what you might say and what you might do in different scenarios. Neither one of which are productive at first glance unless you're being mindful about something that might be happening in the future or might be happening in the past. That's different. That would be saying, hey, I'm going to really focus on what I could be doing differently if I get into these specific situations, not just letting your mind take control on its own. So that's where mindfulness sits. But also, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we get to some of the behavioral dimensions of mindfulness, that what we're talking about right now is actually psychological states. But you can also evaluate mindfulness from a trait-based perspective. So the tendency to be non-judgmental, present moment attention awareness, or have that present moment attention awareness. So think of mindfulness, it could change at any one moment, as you go through, just listening to this webinar, you may have been mindful and mind wandering 10 different times. But then you can also say, in general, on average, is this person typically at a higher state of mindfulness or a lower state, right? That's getting at that trait-based perspective. Behaviors is interesting in that we actually don't even know what exactly are behaviors or outcomes that are related to individuals that are engaged in a mindful state or are higher in trait-based mindfulness. So there's been a few studies, but not a lot of them actually are work-related. And actually, when they do study them, they're not typically associated with leadership. They're just talking about employees at large. So there's still a lot of work to be done about what exactly does mindful leadership look like from a behavioral perspective. All right, so let's get into a few examples. So why is mindfulness or being in present moment attention so important? There's a really, really good study that was done about 10 years ago now by Killingsworth and a co-author, and it's published in the Journal of Science, which is one of the most impactful social science journals that professors like me could ever get published in. And what they did was they put an app on a couple thousand, I think, participants' phone on their iPhones. They created this app from scratch, got volunteers that said, yep, I'll download it and I'll do this study. And what they did was they pinged them at random points throughout the day over a number of days, and they asked them 3 questions. Number 1, what are you doing right now? Are you driving? Are you listening to a webinar? Are you journaling? What are you doing? Another question was, were you doing it mindfully or mindlessly? So mind wandering. And then the third question was, rate the extent to which you're happy or unhappy. And the findings were super interesting. Number 1, get it to click here. We're more likely to be mindless than mindful in every possible activity, except for one. The only one activity that we're actually more mindful than mindless is having sex. Besides that, eating, talking with friends, doing homework, more often than not, we're actually mindless than what we are mindful. The other most important thing is that when it comes to happiness, the activity doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter if we're doing chores, if we're watching a movie, or whatever it is. The real predictor, the better predictor of happiness was whether or not we are being mindful, or being present, or being mindless. So this just speaks to how important paying attention to those states of consciousness really is for our well-being, like happiness, as well as our productivity, like we talked about in the last slide. So where exactly does all this stuff come from? Mindfulness is something that was talked about in ancient Buddhist, as part of the ancient Buddhist philosophy. It's part of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. And for a long time, it was just very simply a way of living, a way of thinking. Being mindful had this roots in Buddhist philosophy, and then eventually, what was made famous by a guy named John Kabat-Zinn, and he was at Massachusetts in their medical center and developed a program called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And he created this program because he was very interested in helping people that were past the point of no return, like they've got a terminal illness or they are in horrible pain, and there's just nothing you can do. And so he created this program as a way to kind of create a cognitive reappraisal where they were focusing on what was going on and dissipating the pain per se, to try and reduce all sorts of symptoms through as well mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, such as stress, anxiety, depression. So it was really a way for the medical sciences to kind of use psychology to help people with some of these challenges. And then it's been used in education. So this is an image of Tim Ryan. I don't really know what his policies are, but he's I think a senator or a congressman in Ohio. And he was behind a $1 point some million grant in education And within education, I mean, my kids are young, and I was fascinated by how early they were introduced to mindfulness as a coping skill and an emotional management skill. Because there's a lot of research in the education industry, particularly for adolescents, talking about how it can increase their well-being, their resilience, and even their creativity as a way to kind of bring themselves back to the present and start to self-cope. And then as of late, it's been brought into the business environment in a big way. And it started out with some of the big name, fashion forward type companies like the Googles and Apples of the world. But over time, it's becoming relatively popular in more mainstream, working class, older conservative type organizations like GE, P&G, and even the U.S. Army that you wouldn't think of perhaps at first glance, this very soft skill of emotion management and control of your states. But it is used broadly, and it's starting to become clear that you can increase well-being as well as performance. And the pathway through which this happens is through self-regulation. And so we'll talk about some of those self-regulation approaches and understanding how it changes our psyche when we're able to implement it and practice it. So I'm going to show you two quick slides with these little graphs here, these little figures. These are actually research projects that I've published relatively recently, and we use mindfulness to try and understand different phenomenon. So the first one that I'll talk about on the bottom here, you have multitasking. And so multitasking has been interesting in that some people will say it's good and some people will say it's bad. So some people will say it's good and then it helps you get more done, right? If we just only do one thing at a time, we can't possibly accomplish all of our goals. And the other side, people will say, no, it's bad because you just really can't do anything well, right? If you're doing more than one thing at a time, you're not doing the other one. And so there's lots of arguments about, is that really just task switching and what's involved there? But we looked at multitasking from a trait-based perspective. So in general, over time, how many things in your life are you trying to juggle at once, and how does that relate to well-being? Oops. What we found was that when you're low in trait-based mindfulness, right? So again, these are trait-based perspectives. This relationship was negative. But when you're high in mindfulness, it's positive. So multitasking can be a good thing or bad thing. It depends on how you're doing it. Are you doing it mindfully? Are you being present? Are you paying attention to why you're doing it and how you're doing it? That can be a deciding factor. Another model that we investigated recently was we looked at what's called motivational control, this ability to stay focused and stay motivated over time. And so what we found was when we surveyed people across 2 weeks and then we combined all of the information, when mindfulness is low, motivational control across the work week goes down. So Monday, we will have the most motivational control, the ability to self-regulate and stay on task compared to Friday. And arguably, there's a lot of rationale as to why, but mindfulness is really helping potentially sustain this motivational control over time. We're not pulled by our circadian rhythms that pull us down into thinking about, oh, it's Friday, I'm getting close to the end of the work week, so I can wind down. Right? So this ability to remain mindful is about self-regulatory capacities. That's what these two examples are getting at. So mindfulness helps in two specific ways. We'll talk about the first one being focused attention. And then the other one we'll talk about emotional regulation. So focused attention is pretty simple. This is what, if someone were to describe what mindfulness meditation would look like, it looks like this. First, you just follow your breath. You're just paying attention to your breath going in, your breath going out. And inevitably in 2 seconds, 20 seconds, 2 minutes, you're going to get distracted. Your mind will inevitably want to wander and it'll go somewhere else and you'll start thinking about something else. But then you start to notice, hey, I'm distracted. I started thinking about something else. And then you can reorient your attention towards the breath. And so this cycle is the practice of mindfulness. And this practice of mindfulness is what leads to this state of mindfulness. And over time, it also can lead to, with enough years and enough practice, it is malleable, and then you can increase trait levels of mindfulness. And so think of this mindfulness practice as being a bicep curl for the mind. And so every time, a lot of times when people say, I'm just not mindful, I just can't do it, I'm not a mindfulness type person, and they're saying, I'm just bad at it, my mind always wanders. Well, that's the point. Everybody's mind does. That's exactly what the brain is meant to do, is kind of circle around all over the place and try to figure things out. But every time you're able to bring yourself back, you're distracted and you bring yourself back, that is the bicep curl. That's actually what is helping you improve. And this improvement process is what's called neuroplasticity. The fact that you can change the makeup of your mind. So the brain continually reorganizes itself by forming new neural connections throughout its life. So a long time ago, they actually thought the brain just was static. It can't get any better than what it is. It can only get worse. But that's been disproven now that we have all this technology like fMRI machines and just way more capabilities to see how the brain actually works. They have been able to prove that through things such as mindfulness meditation, you can increase neuroplasticity, this ability to emotionally self-regulate. All right, so I want to show you an example of this neuroplasticity in action here. And I'm going to do it through this video. All you need to do is look for numbers. So you're going to report back to me how many numbers you see when you watch this video. So it's really quick, so get ready. How many did you see? Most people say one number. They say they saw the number 2. But actually, there's 2 numbers in this quick video here. I'll play it again for you and see if you can see both the first and the second number. Here we go. You see it that time? So the second number was a 7. Most people don't see it on the first round, but they do see it on the second round once they've been reminded. This is called the attentional blink exercise. And they've done lots of research, and they've illustrated that those that are higher in mindfulness, or those that have been primed with some type of mindfulness intervention, which would prime a state of mindfulness, they have a higher likelihood of being able to see that second number as opposed to just the first number. Sorry, I had a little hiccup there. Okay, so the next one that I want to talk about is emotional regulation. So we talked about focused attention. The second process is this idea of being able to regulate our physiology and our psychology that manifest when we're feeling different emotions. And so if you really think about emotions and what they are and what they represent, one primary example is fight or flight. And emotions have a purpose. And this one being, a long time ago, before we evolved into the sophisticated human beings that we are, if we're monkeys out in the jungle and we feel like we're being threatened, we're going to do one of 2 things. We're going to fight or we're going to flight. And in the 21st century, you might want this fight or flight scenario, or that fight or flight reaction if you're walking down a dark alley at night. But for the vast majority of our day, we don't need this intense emotional reaction. We're sitting in air-conditioned and heated rooms with Wi-Fi and looking at our iPhones, right? We live in a different era, but we can't shed these strong emotional reactions that helped us survive and evolve into who we are today. And so recognizing that, yes, emotions are helpful, but sometimes the intensity at which they hit us don't always serve us well. And so this is a little visual of some of the primary emotions and what it feels like in our body. And it's this recognition that when we do experience an emotion, it is physiological, where our blood flow changes and goes to different places, and our blood pressure changes, and all of these different signals and indicators. That's really all emotions are. It's a physiological change, and then also a psychological reaction that is associated with those physiological changes. And so the ability to recognize which emotion is which and why are we feeling that and what exactly is the stimulus for different types of emotions that we have, that can be helpful, right? To be able to pinpoint what it is that we're feeling and why we felt that way. Then we can work backward and potentially come up with solutions. So 2 quick visuals on what that process looks like. So this snow globe here, at rest, it's pretty clear what's on the inside. But for the majority of people throughout the majority of their day, it's all shaken up and they've got snow just floating around everywhere. So we can't really see. It's very hazy and we can never really put our finger on exactly what it is. Another way to think of it is that when we have this high capability for emotional regulation, we can pinpoint with clarity, like the picture on the left here of this butterfly, what emotion are we feeling and why are we feeling it? Where, again, because we're mindless and we're going from one situation to the next and we're not really thinking about why we feel the way we do, we're the picture on the right. We are the butterfly that is a butterfly. It's just super fuzzy and we can't really see what it is. And so this ability to emotionally regulate, it calms the snow globe and it puts the butterfly in clear focus. This is an image of Viktor Frankl. He was a neurologist and a psychotherapist, and he was in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. And when he got out, he wrote this amazing book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it was part philosophical, part psychological, getting at this idea of reminding everybody that we are the only ones in charge of what goes on inside our brains. His argument was, even though they had taken everything from him, they had killed his family, they had taken his belongings, they had made him work. He was basically a slave and he was beaten and tortured. The only thing they couldn't take for him was what was going on in his brain. And so he came up with this quote that's relatively famous. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom." And this quote was picked up by Stephen Covey in his famous leadership self-development book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, reminding everybody that when something happens to you, you have a choice. You decide how you're going to respond. Sometimes it's not so easy because it's happened so quickly. But those that are higher in emotional regulation, and again, that can be fostered through mindfulness practice, the bicep curl of the brain, or those that are more currently mindful in a state of mindfulness, or those that are high in trait-based mindfulness, they have a higher capacity for emotional regulation, which means that space between the stimulus and the response gets bigger, allowing them to react the way they want to react, not how their body wants them to react. A great visual example of this, your emotions don't have to be what's called existential, right? I am angry is an existential statement. No, you're not angry. You feel angry. There's a big difference. So we are experiencing this idea of anger within our body, right? I'm experiencing anger in my body, and this is what it feels like. I'm getting hot here. I'm feeling amped up here. My heart rate's happening here. Like, that actually is what emotions are. It's physiology. And so you get to decide whether or not you're going to act on those emotions. It doesn't have to be existential. It can be experiential. There's a big difference. I went to the Google Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. One of your readings is it's a small segment of a chapter from the book that's associated with that institute, that Leadership Institute. It's like their homegrown leadership development program, but now they do it for the masses. You can go get certified to be a trainer and stuff like that, or be a coach on their philosophy. So I went there to kind of do some research and ask some questions and learn more. And one of the takeaways that they had, I thought was kind of interesting on this emotional regulation portion, was this acronym Siberian North Railroad. So SBNRR. If you want to worry about emotional regulation, you got to stop first, breathe second, notice how you're feeling third, reflect on how you feel, and then respond. And so this is that stimulus response process. And while at first it could be clunky and you might not catch it every time, the more you practice, the higher the likelihood you have of actually engaging in a response that you feel comfortable with. Okay, so what's all this mean for leadership? All right, we've talked about mindfulness a lot. But how does this manifest in terms of influencing others? So there's this book. I used to assign a chapter from a book, Leading in the Midst of Chaos, that is about mindful leadership. But I didn't make you read that. I'm just going to show you a few important slides from it. And the argument is, and this aligns with what we talk about in contemporary theories of leadership, is that different types of leadership influence are important at different times, given different contexts and different environments. And her argument is that now we live very much in a VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and mindful leadership is very important for that environment. So it's volatile in that things just change all the time. It's always changing. Nothing is structured the way it used to be. Things are also uncertain. We've just got so many variables that we don't know what to focus on, and things, again, can change quickly. It's also complex. It's the big data information environment that we live in. We have so much information that it almost makes things more complicated because we're competing against those that have the same information, and those that can use it better than others can be the winners. And then also things are ambiguous. So we move into new areas more so than we used to before in order to stay competitive. Her argument in this book, Leading in the Midst of Chaos, was that for the most part, we go through life in autopilot, or leaders go through life in influencing others on autopilot, going through the motions or just checking the boxes, where mindful leadership is more focused attention that is enabling you to meet the challenges of the VUCA environment. And so to do that, there's one of the PDFs that I do ask you to read gets at what exactly is mindful leadership. So Gonzalez wrote this book of mindful leadership, and she came up with 9 dimensions that I'll talk about here in a second. What's interesting, though, this is, again, very practical, but it has not gone through construct validity. It has not done any type of reliability, validity testing. And there's certainly lots of researchers out there trying to do that, myself included, to really be the one to put their name on this mindful leadership measure. And so just like transformational leadership had 4 dimensions and servant leadership had 10 characteristics, mindful leadership has 9 dimensions, but again, they haven't been proven yet. The first one is just being present, which is a big part of mindfulness. Also being aware of what's going on. Again, another part of that definition of mindfulness, but also maybe more from a behavioral sense, the ability to remain calm and not overreact. So emotional regulation, the ability to stay focused. We talked about focused attention, and then also understand what exactly is important. Is A, B, or C important? Yes, they are. Okay, which one's more important than the next one? Which one do I do first, second, third? That ability to be clear on what you're trying to do. For the others is this first one, equanimous. So it's accepting what is. Sometimes leaders focus way too much on the past, and you can kind of think of that as like the ruminating. And what we really need to say, it doesn't matter how we got to where we are. We need to fix the problem that we're in today. So just accept what it is and figure out how to move forward. The next one is staying positive. So this definitely has a sense of positive psychology and reminding us that our overreactions and being too harsh most of the times don't work very well. We talked about this with abusive supervision. This idea of being compassionate, and I think this has a lot to do more so with empathy and understanding different people's perspective and balancing different perspectives. And then finally, she calls it impeccable, which I don't really like that term, but what she's getting at is this sense of integrity, honesty. And we've talked about this in previous contemporary theories as well. It's almost like they throw in some type of moral or ethical dimension in there, regardless of whether it's really a good part of the definition or not. So I'll let you guys argue over that one on your own. But those are the mindful dimensions that we know so far. So some of the good things about mindful leadership, it's this idea of yin and yang. So it's both X and both Y. It kind of balances 2 opposites at the same time. So it is both soft and both strong in that mindful leaders are coming at things with empathy, and they're not afraid to address tough conversations and do so in a way that is trying to make forward progress rather than trying to make somebody feel bad, doing it for the right intentions. And it's also strong in that they are making forward progress at all costs and not afraid to jump into this VUCA environment. And then it's beneficial for the self and others. So it's helping my own well-being, but it also is helping others' well-being by being calm and staying focused and making sure that you're satisfied with the work that you're doing and all those good outcomes. And then it's fitting for this VUCA environment in that if there's way too much going on and it's all happening so fast, the ability to stay focused on the present is going to help you make good decisions. But in terms of criticisms, it's really unclear in the literature when they're starting to talk about it, especially from the practitioner literature. Are we talking about this as a state, trait, behavior, set of behaviors, which would be a style. What are we talking about? So it's just very vague at this point. And that is the biggest criticism that happens a lot of times. It happened with servant leadership too. When it's talked about in the practitioner circle first, it hasn't yet gone through construct validity. No one's really fleshed out a conceptual model, so it's kind of unclear. The second one is this connection between mindfulness and EI. So one of the assigned readings is Google's Search Inside Yourself. There's a part of an article or part of a book chapter that I put in there, and it's really sometimes kind of unclear how different or how similar they are. The argument is that the practice of mindfulness is associated with increases in emotional intelligence. So it's something that you can cultivate through these mindfulness practices. But then the question is, well, if you're mindful, do you need to be high on emotional intelligence or vice versa? So it's not real clear exactly in terms of construct divergence or construct similarity, what exactly those two look like. And then also, there's not a lot of information about dyadic leadership behaviors. So leadership is influencing others towards common goals, but we don't have a lot of information on what exactly is it that the leader does and how does the follower react. So in the end of the classical approaches, we talked about LMX and how important it was to understand both the leader and follower perspective, but there's not a whole lot of that going on yet. And then finally, there is no established construct for mindful leadership. The best we've seen so far is that they have leaders or somebody that is a supervisor or manager complete a trait-based mindfulness measure, which has nothing to do with work and it has nothing to do with followers. It's just rating the extent to which that person is engaging in present moment attention on a consistent basis, and then calling that mindful leadership. But that's not exactly, I think, what some of the practitioners are talking about. Like, for example, the 9 dimensions that we talked about. Those are specific behaviors. Those are specific things a leader can do with a follower. So we're not quite there yet. So, okay. Sorry about the long content video. I really like this one. I think it's fun. I like that it's contemporary and it still is unclear what it is. I think that creates some cool conversations. And remember that it's the most contemporary of the contemporary theories of leadership, in that eventually it'll become clear what are the distinct sets of behaviors. Right now we have those 9 dimensions, and right now we know a lot about mindfulness. We know that it can be helpful in terms of focused attention and emotional regulation, but translating that into what exactly a leader does for the follower is important. And then as well, coming up with that nomological network or conceptual model. What are the antecedents to mindful leadership behavior? What are the outcomes of mindful leadership behavior? What are the psychological processes or mediators? And then what are the moderators of that? There's not a whole lot of that out there yet. It's still kind of to be determined. So, all right. Great job. See you next time.